unwarranted music opinion. I don't care if you don't want to hear my opinion about your robot.
Welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, a show in which three music fans choose an album, reconvene, and hope that we don't hate each other's picks. I'm Jacob Lindberg. I'm here with Brian Courtney.
Hey.
And Chaz Jenkins.
Hello, everybody.
And this is a regular episode where we basically had free reign to choose whatever music we wanted to, and I think we're going to start with my pick this week. So my pick this week is a little bit different than normal because it's not even technically really an album. You were giving me a look, Brian.
Is it really?
It's 10 songs. I mean,
Sonically, maybe not. But it's Throwing Muses' Doghouse cassette, which is what they recorded before ever recording a full debut. It's what got them signed to 4AD Records, the first American band to be signed to that label. And they would be very influential in that regard. They would later go on to, or around this time, would tour with the Pixies, which kind of turned into like this sibling relationship almost, where, you know, the Muses at this time were at the oldest, you know, late teens, early 20s, and the Pixies were older, and they were just thrust into this touring lifestyle and recording, and they kind of formed a friendship, and later on, Tanya Donnelly of Throwing Muses, Kim Deal of Pixies would become founding members of the Breeders. So there's kind of some history there. The Doghouse cassette is pretty wild. Throwing Muses are basically an indie rock band. I would say they're lumped in with alternative rock sometimes because of the music they would release in the late 80s and early 90s. But when it comes to this album, I would say it sounds more like Pavement or early Modest Mouse even, compared to like straight up alt rock. Especially in the guitar lines.
Yeah, there's barely any crunch.
The weird bass, and people also put it in with post-punk, but I still don't even really think it's all that similar to some of the main post-punk staples. Like, there's not really any Joy Division, there's no Cure, there's no, you know, Gang of Four. It's kind of its own thing, and to this day, it's kind of its own thing because of the way these songs are constructed. So I will leave it to you two to hopefully not make me very sad.
All right, so this album is pretty amazing. It's kind of scary at some points, where just how manic her performance gets. Who is the lead singer? What is her name?
Kristen Hirsch. So this Throwing Muses was a band that formed between Kristen Hirsch, her stepsister Tanya Donnelly, and then a few other members that I really should name because they're pretty important, especially the drummer, longtime member of the band. So Kristen Hirsch around this time was going through a lot of mental illness related things, and I'll get into a little bit more of the context of this release when it comes around to my turn. Yeah, this album is very emotionally stark, as you said, manic, and
But I think it's to the album's advantage.
oh, 100%.
Because what I like about this album the most is that even though it gets really crazy, there are still like a lot of pop elements that I can attach to. It doesn't get too wild in that vein. Like, the drums are doing a lot of cool melodic stuff. The bass is all over the place, which I always love. It all ties together where, while vocally this album is frightening, it still keeps it grounded at times to where I can still enjoy these tunes. Does that make sense? It's not too experimental where I'm getting myself detached from it just because how wild it is. I think there's a good balance of manic vocal performance and solid composition and instrumentation, which I really like. Some of the, like, there's catchy harmonies at times, which I love. I'm glad this album is doing things that can still, like, you could hear this on the radio maybe. Does that make...
I've played it on the radio.
Yes. I think my favorite song is Call Me. Call Me. I've been humming that all week. The track is so catchy.
The transition from the first part into
that bridge,
the coda
oh my God,
is fantastic. Like the drums slowing down. Boom,
I also really
boom,
like...
boom.
Yeah, and then the guitar. For me, the guitars always pull the songs together here the most. They're kind of the glue, while the drums are usually, and the drums and the bass are usually a little wild. I wouldn't call them like completely.
It's not.
They're wild, but like, you know, they're not extremely crazy. Like,
yeah,
you know, they're palatable. But like the guitars always tied it together. Like the second half of Call Me, where we get the long strum, just the bring.
The drummer's name is Dave Narciso, and he kind of famously around this time barely uses any cymbals, if you notice. There are hardly any cymbals on the whole album.
A bit of a turnoff for me. Just a very small complaint. I tend to enjoy the cymbals. I think they could have done some. I think they could have enhanced some of the tracks here to give that nice loud like catharsis. But the vocals really don't need the assistance.
I would agree because in Call Me, like those dun dun, some cymbals there would have really added to it. But I didn't really notice that. I didn't really, honestly, I kind of disagree because I never noticed. Where's the cymbals? Yeah,
I can see that complaint, but at the same time, I think the lack of that catharsis adds to this kind of nervous and anxious
you can tell
aspect
that
of the music.
You could tell that Kristen is in the front for a reason, and the band is kind of behind her. Mm-hmm. It all makes sense of why it's arranged that way, because when she goes for it, she really goes for it.
She goes
and the band kind of takes a step back because of it.
Yeah, she goes between, like, melodic singing to just, like, screaming.
Which is the song where she's like,
you
know the song.
Vicky's Box. The second part of Vicky's Box.
Wild with it.
She really absorbs the instrumental, because the production here is
it's pretty. Oh my god, the production for a cassette, for a demo cassette.
This was recorded in a studio. I found out these songs were written in the Doghouse, which was a kind of like rundown apartment that
like a hangout spot.
Kind of like that.
Yeah, because it doesn't sound like it was recorded there at all. It's pretty.
The way you were
so they toured around. Someone who had a studio noticed them and said, "Hey, I'll record a tape for you and I'll send it out to a bunch of record labels." That's how it fell into the hands of Evo Watts Russell at 4AD, and that's how they got signed.
Because I was going to say, the production on this for a demo cassette tape is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, there are no flourishes or anything here, but everything sounds punchy, and I think the lack of, a lot of production effects lends itself to the emotion on this album, especially Kristen's vocals, because they're really not aided by anything other than the power just behind them. It makes it when she yells on this album, it's like you're in a room with her yelling. It's not like
it plays like
screamo or metal or anything like that, where it kind of is this primal guttural thing. It's like she's right there.
It plays like a really solid performance art piece. Like I could see her just by herself performing these songs with the vocal inflections, and it would be a solid performance art. Talking about some of my favorite tracks, like I mentioned, Call Me is probably my favorite, just how catchy it is, and how that one I think has stuck with me the most. But I really like Hate My Way, America, She Can't Say No. America, She Can't Say No, no. Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, that's a great...
Raise the Roses is pretty good, and The She Wolf After the War is pretty awesome too. And Fish is a decent closer. I think those songs...
You didn't mention Sinkhole?
Sinkhole's good.
Or Green?
See, Sinkhole is one that I was super excited going into this one, and then as I got to it, I was like, okay, this is good. I enjoy this. Green is fantastic, man. Green is like their best song.
Green is a Tanya Donnelly cut. There are two songs that were written and sung by Tanya Donnelly on this, and it's Green and Raise the Roses.
God,
and you can notice that it's not Kristen singing.
Yeah, I think that's why those didn't stick with me the most, because I really like Kristen's.
There aren't really the freakouts, I don't think, because if I can recall, there's really no
There are no really freakouts on either of those tracks.
Yeah, Green. I like them.
They're more melodic. They're a little poppier, and Tanya would go down a more poppy direction further into her musical career, and that's kind of showing up a little bit on this, but I think it absolutely lends itself to this, and even though this is a tape and not really an album, I think it flows really well.
It's a good break from the craziness.
It's necessary. It's a necessary cool down.
Because if you were to have just the wild manic all the way through, it would get tiring after a while.
Maybe you could put Green a little later in the track listing. Looking at the track listing that they use for the official release of this, for the self-titled, we just get Call Me into Green. Yeah, I would have preferred that, I think. But Sinkhole's a cool moment. It is standout on the album. It kind of has this, country-ish vibe, I guess.
It has kind of just an old school country vibe. And it was actually a college radio hit, I realized. Which is cool because I play it on the air pretty frequently.
Fear, another great cut in my opinion. I love good, that. Yeah. That one's the most tension building. I think we're going to talk about Spiderland, and that one's meant to build tension. I think Fear builds tension as well as any song on that album. By the time we get to the end, my hairs are on end. It feels like it's so. And that's when the drums are really at their strongest. While I agree some cymbal flourishes maybe would have enhanced some of the choruses on this thing, for me, when we get to that point on the album, because we're not getting those loud crashes to break up this sharp shots of percussion, the do-do, and they're deeper, it becomes more primal, which really helps the feel of that track, I think. And that also helps Fish as well.
I think what I like most about this album is that there's just many musical moments that either the guitar does or the drums do, or even a combination of the three with Kristen's vocals, It just makes for really great, memorable moments throughout the album. Whether it's like a really catchy bridge or crazy scream she'll do. Call Me is a great example where that excellent transition into the bridge, or the drumming on the chorus of America She Can't Say No. Those things just keep making me come back to it. Like, I'm getting excited for those moments because I know they're coming. It makes for a great listening experience because I'm anticipating the best moments of the album. And they're spread throughout, so it makes for a good, consistent listen, I think.
And you mentioned moments. I think that's really the key to Throwing Muses, because on several songs here, there just are no choruses. You know, it's just like a verse and then maybe even a third. Like Vicky's Box is just 3 verses stuck together. And maybe the first couple times you listen to it, you have a hard time finding something to latch onto because there aren't any big choruses, melodies that are repeated all that often. But the more you listen to it, you get all these little instrumental moments, all these little vocal moments that are catchy in their own right. And I think it definitely lends itself to repeated listening because of that. Just like a treasure trove of moments that you can find throughout this.
So you were going to give us some more background on this, I think. How far did you plan to go? This goes pretty deep. This is pretty...
There's a pretty detailed...
The backstory behind this cassette is
it's really just Hirsch's backstory, her life leading up to this.
I don't want to put any words in her mouth. I have purchased and have been reading her memoir that starts around this time. But essentially, when she was still a teen, she was hit by a car in a hit and run. And after that, in the hospital, she began hearing just sounds, which she described as like floaty angels at first, but then they took a darker turn, became dissonant, and I think one of the words she used was industrial. Basically, these sounds turned into melodies and songs, and the only way to really stop them from overwhelming her
was compose them,
was to kind of exercise them by writing, putting them down, and performing them.
Could you imagine, and that's where your music comes from. That's wild to me. I couldn't even imagine hearing something like that and then having the ability to compose it. And for what it's worth, these songs are really catchy and really great.
Yeah, again, for the time that it was released, I think the influence and originality of the sound here is kind of underrated in the scope of... When you think of indie rock in the mid-'80s, you think of Dinosaur Jr. or The Replacements, but all of those things you could also lump them in with alternative rock. I really don't think this has that much in common with alt-rock, even though they would become pretty much a straight-up alt-rock band by the early 90s. Like I said, this is kind of more like Pavement's more experimental movements. That's probably not a great comparison, but that's the closest thing. Just because of the way they eschew structure and normal ways of composing these songs. Yeah, there's not really anything that I can point to that is like a direct comparison to this.
It's a black sheep of the bunch for sure, because it has similar elements to all different types of music, but it really is its own thing. Because I could say I've heard stuff like this, like that bass all over the place. I've heard that in...
That bass all over the place.
I heard some of that in Minutemen. And these very melodic guitars I've heard in all... That's like an indie rock staple.
There were 1 or 2 things on here that I legitimately thought were like a little post-punky. Like there's some drumming.
Still, there's influence for sure.
Yeah, that was a big surprise for me, I think. Mainly in the percussion. This is really good. There's not a whole lot of personal connection for me here, so sometimes I do have, when I'm listening through, I kind of find myself disconnecting from it a little bit. But no complaints about the production. It's clean. There's no moment that sticks out as bad. There are a couple of moments that are, maybe kind of lull me over. I actually think She Can't Say No is not like a favorite cut of mine, or one that every time it comes on, I'm just sort of like, okay, not totally into it for whatever reason. But Call Me, Green, Hate My Way. Yeah, like all really, really good cuts. This is probably, like, as far as indie records go that you've suggested, this one has my favorite performances on it, especially vocally. I think Hirsch just
Tanya Donnelly.
I want to say Linda. I was like, that's wrong. And Tanya's performance on Green is like the best on the album, in my opinion.
The way that she hits that weird high note on the chorus.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. That's like the most catchy moment on the whole thing for me is there's one boy and one house. And the way the guitar, it's really perfect. It's like a super...
Which song is it where near the end of the track, she goes for this high note that kind of like stays through it because it's near the end of the album.
Maybe Raise the Roses if you're talking about a Tanya
That
cut.
is the most beautiful moment on the album, is that high note that she kind of sustains near the end of the track.
This is like the same issue I run into with every album that we've done that's similar to this one. I won't say like this one because this one really stands out in my mind compared to like a Life Without Buildings or Beat Happening or Raincoat. Indie band, not to label them because they're all very different. They're all very distinct. I would never mistake a Raincoat song for a Beat Happening song. Probably pick out a Life Without Buildings song. And that stands for Throwing Muses as well. They stand out, but I always run into this problem with this sound where I just have trouble being gripped by it. It's just not a sound that really pulls me in. What really pulled me into this thing and was able to really make me like it more than I've liked those other records is Hirsch and Tanya. Like their vocal performances and the songwriting here are really cool.
Very
There's some
enthralling.
awesome abstract like lyric moments here. It's like I love the what are they really saying here? Even if it seems plain as day, I like when you can't quite
there's
pick it
some
apart.
pretty cryptic lyrics. Could you like kind of dissect
Well,
some of
it's
the
all
stuff?
coming from the experience. It's very, very autobiographical.
Lots of like references.
Vivid. It's imagery. It's kind of what's going on internally. There's feelings of like isolation, which you get on Call Me.
Probably references to stuff in their life that everyone in the band could recognize, but they've twisted it in such a way.
Like Fish, which is what Fish is about, is a homemade little Jesus figure that had like a weird green scaly thing on it that they called Fish Jesus that was on their apartment wall. So that's what Fish is. That's what the Fish is.
Glad I
you would
know
never
that.
know if you didn't read the book or
Yeah.
what have
But
you.
I find that the emotional impact of this album is huge for me. And it wasn't initially. Like, I had to listen to this several times for it to really grow on me, and it really grew on me. Like, to the point where, like, Hate My Way, goodness gracious, that's like a top 3 song of all time. Like, all time top 3 song. The way that it starts with the lyrics that she's basically quoting someone that was on the street who was like a street preacher shouting things. One of my favorite opening lines, I could be a smack freak and hate society, quoting all of these things. I could hate God and blame dad. And then when it shifts into the second half of the song where her first really yelling moment happens, like just the emotional starkness of the way she's singing and what she's singing about is like one of the most powerful musical moments I've ever heard. And the last verse, which starts with "A boy was tangled in his bike forever," which is a reference to a pretty famous picture that was taken of a mass shooting in 1983. And she actually references the perpetrator by name with the line, "Mr. Huberty had a gun in his head." And before that, on the same song, she says, "I have a gun in my head." I think it's a metaphor. It's some kind of mental illness that has a trigger, something that can set you off. And it makes sense because it was widely reported that James Huberty, before he shot up a bunch of people in a McDonald's, had tried to call a mental hospital. And because of a clerical error, they never got back to him. Just the existential crisis of like how all of these people and the line freaking, "So I sit up late in the morning and ask myself again, how do they kill children and why do I want to die?" The way she says that last line, it's the quietest moment on almost the entire album. She goes from like the yelling, it's the most plain, understandable, the least cryptic moment on the whole thing. It is absolutely heartbreaking. It is one of the saddest. I can't even. I don't know how to describe it. It's just. It's
badass.
I wouldn't have. All right, well, I'm feeling a decent 7 on Throwing Muses. Not personally for me, but like, I'm sure the deeper you dig, the more attached you can become to it. But for me, it wouldn't have made me dig deeper in the first place, I think. It's just not sonically something I'm totally enamored by, but I think that vocally I was.
I'm going to go with a strong 8 on the Doghouse cassette. It would be higher, but for 2 reasons. One, the performances are so manic that I got to be in a certain mood if I want to come back to this, but it's still high enough for me where because of how poppy the music can get and melodic and harmonies and all that stuff balances out the manic performance from Kristen, that it wouldn't take a lot for me to want to come back to this. But I still think that I have to be in a certain mindset just because of how crazy it gets. And the lyrics are a little too cryptic and way too personal.
So that's like the number one thing that I love about it is how personal
No, it's fine, but I'm kind of with Brian, and like it's hard for me to attach to it lyrically. Musically, though, I'm all for it. So I think it's a good balance.
I think that that's probably true for a lot of people, but for me, I come back to this pretty often just for...
Well, you've really grown to know
yeah, like it. This has grown on me a lot. I can just put it on a whim and be super enthralled by Call Me. The energy that it starts with. All of the music here to me is very, very interesting and creative and energetic, and even when it's stark emotionally, there's still a lot of fun to be had on this album. This is, I think, like a decent 9. I was thinking it was going to be like a light 9, but listening to this for the podcast, the second half, especially Raise the Roses, really grew on me.
Mm-hmm. That's a great song.
I do think that the debut album, even though I prefer the production on the demo, ironically, the debut album has Soul Soldier and Delicate Cutters to end it. It's hard to take this package of songs without those two, so I would still kind of prefer the debut, but I've been coming back to this a lot.
The album I've picked is a classic, Spiderland by Slint, a Kentucky band, which is pretty awesome because we're all from Kentucky. So, you know, shout out to the boys.
Wow.
Shout out to the boys.
That's our home. We're from that state.
So Spiderland is an album that I'm air quoting familiar with. Like, I've known about it for the longest time. It's a huge, in the vein of like albums that everyone knows and loves. It's one of the big ones, you know, right up there with like Paul's Boutique, In the Aeroplane, all those types of albums. One that everyone should listen to at least once because, you know, it's so classic and loved, which I haven't done yet. So I really wanted to do it finally, and I thought the podcast would be perfect for it. It's an album that is hindered as like the beginnings of math rock and has a lot of elements of genres before it, but it's kind of like the leeway into that sort of post-rock sound. It's heavily influential in that regard. It came out in 91. For the time for this kind of album to come out is pretty fantastic.
Probably sounded...
ahead of its time doesn't even do it enough justice for the time this album came out and what it was doing. What do you guys think?
I like both of the other albums we're doing for this episode more. This was my, in quotes, least favorite. It's really good, but like...
Could you sound like you actually mean it then?
It's one of those things where like...
Wow, that was harsh.
You get to a piece of music that everyone like super reveres, and you know you don't have expectations necessarily, but you associate it with how great it's supposed to be.
Hell no, I just listened to it.
And at worst, these albums end up being really good, and here we are at the worst case scenario for me when I listen to something like this, where it's like super revered. Yeah, listen to this. This spawns this, this, and this. It has elements of this. And maybe it's because in the context of that, I've heard all of the sounds, like the post-rock and the math rock that this thing went on to inspire first, and I'm not seeing it so much as a progenitor of those things, but just as a combination of them instead, and the context isn't there for me. That being said, I'm just not that into it. There are moments where it's a bit of a mixed bag for me, honestly. Like, there are moments where I'm like, hell yeah to this thing, Washer and Captain, and then there are moments where I'm kind of scratching my head and kind of wondering, why do people like this so much, with Breadcrumb Trail and Don Amon especially.
Are you kidding me? Breadcrumb Trail and Don Amon are some of the best songs off this album. Besides Good Morning Captain, which is definitively the best song on this album.
It is great.
I would agree with that take, except for the fact that Washer, like...
Okay,
well,
Washer's great, yes, but Good Morning Captain, holy shit. Can we just talk about that moment in the song where it goes... Boys, that's an anchor being lifted up. Holy God, these guys are amazing. And when he screams, Abigail, I love you, I miss God. It's so awesome. That song alone, you want to talk about musical moments like for you with Hate My Way? When he screams that and this vivid imagery, okay, I'm going to say right now, I think lyrically this is one of the greatest albums ever made. These descriptive stories, like a graphic novel. It's genius. This songwriting is genius. I've never in my life heard lyrics like this where it tells a story but it feels like a movie that's being played before me. Dawn stepped outside. Shivers every time.
It felt good to be alone.
Yeah. That's a cool moment. I think the delivery and the performances here are not the issue. They're pretty good throughout. Like, at worst, they're pretty good. And, like, Captain really is an amazing song.
Good Morning, Captain. It's the
imagery,
expulsion of all of the anxious energy that's been building throughout the entire album with that one scream that gives you shivers.
And I just wish, like, I just feel like the songs here don't tie up that tension for me. Sonically, yes. Lyrically, like in Dawn Amon, which is the only time I kind of have an issue with maybe the performance aspect a little bit. I like the quiet kind of like very plain storytelling, but I think the lack of percussion really hurts the song for me. Like, I think it would have helped to build tension. I think it would have made the song much better, in my opinion.
Well, not every song is there to build tension. It's all about atmosphere with this album. Images that this puts into you, especially in Breadcrumb Trail, how descriptive. I can see the characters. I can see the landscape. I can see the carnival, the fortune teller.
I think that's more
all of that.
The sounds lend themselves to the energy of the track. Lyrically, it's like my least favorite track.
What are you talking about?
It doesn't come together.
Roller coaster instead?
It doesn't come together for me. It seems a little disjointed. I understand what he's trying to do here, and I just don't really connect with it. And also, like, it doesn't fit with any other point on the album, because right after this we get Nosferatu Man, which you could loosely tie to the first track, I think.
No, you don't tie any of these songs together. It's vignettes.
Dawn Amon to Washer to Captain and For Dinner, that for me is like where the album really takes off in terms of lyrics and story. I feel like those tracks go perfectly together.
They're connected in an atmospheric way, but they're all different stories. Each song is a different story.
I mean, that's true, yeah.
So you can't be like, this is disconnected. No, it's a different...
Well, I mean, you can find that not every song accomplishes the same atmosphere at the same level as others.
I think they do, though.
I agree with you. I think Breadcrumb Trail is one of the best songs on the album. The first chorus, where...
Into the sky!
Yes, that's the moment where the album really hooks you, and it's like, all right. And it makes this seemingly innocuous moment of just riding a roller coaster, it makes it seem like the biggest, most important thing.
No, oh my God.
I don't know, it's in the performance.
I gotta talk about it again. Good Morning, Captain. When the guitar is like, and it sounds like an anchor is being lifted up. Oh my God, I can't even... And that's like a beautiful moment on the whole album too. Those beautiful chords while that sound is being repeated. And then the doo-doo kicks back in. Oh man, it blows my mind.
That's my favorite groove on the whole thing. God, man, that groove's... yes.
I would say that the most beautiful moment on the album for me, Good Morning Captain's maybe my favorite track, but Washer is...
You're so predictable.
It has...
It's a great song.
It has
a great song.
Fantastic instrumentation.
But just how did I know that Jacob Limerick was going to like the longest song on this album?
Oh my God. It's not because it's long. You're a turd.
It's got great chords. It builds perfectly. It has fantastic melody. And throughout the album, that's the number one thing that I am looking for with this. And it's the instrumentation, it's the performance, it's the songwriting. And above even the lyrics and the atmosphere, it's the instrumentation that really draws me into this thing.
Hell yeah.
First time I heard this was maybe 6-7 years ago at this point. I've known this album
What was it like coming back
well.
to it, like after that?
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting. I still...
Because you've heard a lot of different types of music.
Yeah, I have.
Since then.
And I will say, it doesn't... I don't know how to phrase this, because I still absolutely adore this thing. Like, a lot. But I don't know if I quite worship it in the way that I used to. I think there are other albums that I discovered around the same time. Maybe If You're Feeling Sinister by Belle and Sebastian would be an example. Probably discovered that and this around the same time. That album has only gone up in my estimation. This one, I don't know if I connect to it in the same way I did.
God,
Sometimes I feel like the lyrics are a little too on the nose. Don't get me wrong. When I criticize this, it's a slight criticism. It's not something that I'm meaning to take away from the idea that this is an absolute landmark in musical history, because it is, and I do 100% believe it is, but I don't know if all of the lyrics transfer the atmosphere in the way that they are meant to. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just not picking up on it in the same way that I used to.
And here's the
But
thing.
that's just where I'm at. And I think one of the songs that demonstrates this is Nosferatu Man. I don't really get much of an emotional
I'll say
impact.
that's probably the weakest song, but that's not saying much.
And it's it has a fantastic post-hardcore math rock instrumental. And I think that the structure of this album is genius. The way
Honestly,
it starts with
I wish For Dinner was an instrumental. I really wish it was like a different story each time. But I do like that it kind of takes a break lyrically to give you that instrumental piece and then leads right into Good Morning Captain.
Right, as I was going to say, like it starts with these two high-energy post-hardcore math rock tracks, kind of similar to maybe No Means No would be the only comparison around that time. And then it goes into these really quiet, more storytelling-oriented tracks with Don Amon and Washer. Then you get the instrumental, a kind of break from all of this, and then Good Morning Captain. It's with 6 tracks, they're able to make a huge statement with this thing, and
it's
the way
not
that they're
long. It's like
put together.
It's like a little over 30 minutes.
It's a lot.
And
to,
it's a breeze too. I love that it's a breeze. I'm gonna have to disagree though. I'd connect so heavily with this music. Of all the post rock, math rock stuff I've heard, which hasn't been much.
Well, you got to think this is like the genesis of all of that. And what's really admirable about it, I will say, is it's not blatantly post-rock. It's only post-rock in like snippets. Like there are only moments where it's like, oh man, this is like a really dark Godspeed song, or like there's and like math rock is like, oh man, can we talk about the drumming? Holy,
The drumming is masterful.
Not only is the playing masterful, the production, there's so much channel manipulation on the cymbals, and it's flawless every time. There's one song, I can't remember specifically, where they have the hi-hat in the right channel, and then the crash just collides inside of your head from the left side. That's thrilling. Honestly, I think the reason that my connection to this thing is kind of small is because really the strongest I feel connected to this album, there are moments lyrically, but mostly it's instrumentally. Hard thing to do with me, because usually I'm just into catchier instrumentals.
That's
or
the
like
majority of the album, like because I have one issue with this album. I have one issue. The vocals are behind the instruments most of the time. In the
I
production.
love how they're drowned. That's one of my favorite things.
I think that works.
You didn't like this before, though. You have not been a fan of this with the music in general.
Yeah, I'm not. Because, that I said beforehand, this is lyrically one of the strongest albums I think I've ever heard, and I think I will ever hear in my life of listening to music. And the fact that half the time I can't, with headphones, no matter what, I can barely hear what he's saying in Breadcrumb Trail or Nosferatu Man. I can hear him a little bit better in Don Amon, but that's just because the music's quieter.
They're honestly, they have the most
Especially
presence.
Good Morning Captain. I want to hear. I want to be able to hear. I know it's for a purpose because it's atmospheric. It's to feel the tension, to feel lonely. But I think it hurts the album overall because when you have such strong lyricism and I can barely hear what you're saying, when that's my biggest draw to you, it hurts it for me. I wish I was able to hear him crisp. And we kind of talked about this beforehand. Jacob, you mentioned that when it gets loud, it helps. I think the loud moments wouldn't have been taken away if the lyrics were in the front the whole time, because he can still be like, Don stepped outside, like that quietness, but I'd still be able to hear his words. So then when it gets loud, vocally, it's still an amazing moment. But that's just my personal opinion.
It's not an issue for me, but I can see where you're coming from, and I can see why that would maybe someone like Brian wouldn't be able to connect with this that much. Like, I still love it, but I can see why someone might not.
If I were taking it track by track, like Breadcrumb Trail, like the story on that thing, it's a real eyebrow raiser for me when I have the rest of the album for context. Like, it's just sort of, like, I get what they're doing sonically. I think they succeed at that. And like Nosferatu Man, weirdly enough, for the same reason I like it, I kind of like that it's maybe disconnected from the rest of the album. I like that it kind of is very abstractly tackling like what is maybe a toxic relationship. And
it's like a vampire. It's
literal. There are literal
it's
vampire
just,
references.
It's just telling stories. There's no like big.
But for me, I can't help but feel like the tracks from Don Amon to the end of the album have some sort of link. And that's where the album really took off for me.
You could argue that the stories are connected, but I still think it's just vignettes. Each song is a different story.
I think musically...
It's what musically that ties it all together. Each story from each song has tension in its own unique way.
You guys really don't see how those, like, do you...
No. I get what he's saying. I think that musically even, not just lyrically, but musically, tracks 3 through 6... are in a spot, and then tracks 1 and 2 are in kind of a different spot. Because tracks 1 and 2 are the least post-rocky of everything here. They're more post-hardcore, more math rock, and they're
like Breadcrumb Trail has the nice instrumental break in the middle that doesn't feel totally structured. Like it takes you a minute to kind of realize how the song is composed. I think it's not typical, and no song on here is really typical. The closest you maybe come is Nosferatu Man, but there are no choruses, stuff like that. But I just really feel like the last few tracks, like with Dawn Amon into Captain, are like super reflective and really gorgeous in their retrospective lyrical topics.
Good Morning Captain blows my mind every time.
Like the end of that song feels like the conclusion to Dawn Amon.
Every time this record goes, it
like the theme
gets
of
my blood boiling.
The theme of loneliness, but also kind of resolve in that loneliness, where Dawn looks in the mirror, sees a friend at the end of the song. It's kind of like, I think it caps the song off nicely, but then by the time we get to Captain, we see the mistakes of solidarity, and that's what it represented to me when I was listening to it.
I'm sure you could pick themes and what they represent. I like listening to this album just like its stories being told to me. I think that helps the listening experience so much better.
And the biggest thing for me is people really praise the performances on this thing, and I would never knock someone for liking something, but for me, as far as performances go, I don't think these are really all that wild or crazy for me. Like, I get that the nervous nature is there, and the end of Oh Captain is really the only catharsis, in my opinion, on the whole album, where it's a true release. We get a little bit yelling on Breadcrumb Trail, but I'm just not hot on that song in general. But, like, by the time we get to Captain, I need him to let go of this.
Well, because it's a buildup.
Yeah, and I'm praising it
and
for that.
It doesn't need to be crazy. That's not.
No,
point.
I'm not saying it would be amazing I'm not saying like he should yell louder.
I'm glad that so much of the vocal performances are very quiet.
No, because it helps build to that point at the end. My point is people were praising the performances here and having that context going in. I don't mean to sound pretentious, but I just really wasn't impressed. At the end of the Oh Captain, like when I was reading into it, like he gets sick and like he admits himself to a healthcare center or
a mental hospital.
Yeah, like a mental hospital.
Right after the recording session, which this whole album was recorded in a single weekend.
Yeah, it was 4 days, and I think sometimes you can actually hear that. I think sometimes the quality suffers just a bit from how quickly this thing was put out, and knowing that, it was more of an aha. It was like, oh, okay, it sounds.
I didn't know that going in.
It sounds a little.
I didn't look. I just listened to it.
Doesn't sound bad.
I think that really helped me.
It's a little like rickety, I guess I would describe it. Like it's a little cobbled together at points, even though it's very, the time.
I disagree. I
the
think
weird
it
time
flows
signatures
so smoothly. I couldn't tell you a mistake if there was one. Only problem is production on the vocals. I want those to be in the front.
I just think we stumble through some of the tracks here more so than we play through them. But, I got a couple listens into this thing, like more than one, obviously, like around 3. I was planning to get a more listens in. I was a little strapped for time this week, so that could be informing this as well. Perhaps it's a really slow grower. I could see myself revisiting just because it is so revered, just to maybe see if I can ever get to that level of appreciation. But as of this recording, I'm feeling like a light 7 on Spiderland.
God damn you, Brian.
My score has gone down just a little bit, but that's just a little bit. It's like a strong 9. It's no longer really one of my heralded 10s because I just don't think I have that emotional attachment with it like I used to. But like I said, the instrumentation and the songwriting, the dynamics, the way they have this mastery over quiet moments into louder moments and when to have that anxious energy explode. I think that they are extremely skilled at all of those things, and it makes for an extremely enthralling and gripping atmospheric listen.
I'm going with a strong 9 on Spiderland. This is so close to being a 10 for me. It's a perfect album in that regard, where each track is a separate experience, but you can listen to it all the way through, never want to skip a track. That for me is like the biggest thing to be a 10 for me. The production on the vocals is such a drawback for me that it's not perfect to me. This has issues, but that's where the only issues for me lie. Everything else, God bless. The praise this album gets is well-deserved for that reason. Because instrumentally and composition-wise and the storytelling and lyrically, it's perfect.
My pick is a trap album from last year by Playboi Carti. A lot of rappers nowadays blow up, and similar come up for this guy. He had a big song called Magnolia that was extremely popular, and then he released a debut, self-titled, and then he released this album the next year, I believe, within the next 2 years.
What's this album called, Brian?
Die Lit. It's a trap album. It's an hour long, and I think it's one of the best trap albums I've heard. When people talk about trap rap that's like really good, I think most people are going to point you in 2 directions. You're going to get people that point you to
Travis Scott, probably.
Yeah, like a Travis Scott kind of like psychedelic influence on the sound, or a Denzel Curry who has kind of a conscious angle on it. I think this can go toe to toe with any of their work. Like, honestly, like 100%, and for different reasons, because I think we see a third branch of where you can take this sound. So you can take it in a super sonic direction, but like with the Travis Scott, you get like the psychedelic noises, take it in a weird sound direction where it's like you're getting these really trippy.
Dial It is like hypnagogic hip hop.
Yeah,
or
like
dream hop.
Yeah,
you know,
you get the lyrical angle with Denzel, you get the kind of washed sound, like the very dense sound with Travis, and here you just get like in my head, this is a real stretch, and I don't think it's even that true, but like a little bit of kraut in here with just how repetitive we're getting. It's a real stretch here. Like, I'm Michael Jordan at the end of Space Jam right now, but like I really think you could make that comparison. Like, you could see think of Halagalo by Noi, and how, like, you know, that whole time you're getting that one riff, first song here, the whole time, the synths, and they don't stop.
It's like an electronic or like a minimal techno or like ambient techno kind of appeal to this thing. Compared to a lot of other hip hop, it's got a very different draw to it. You're probably not going to get really clever lines. You're probably not going to get production that is going to wow you, really. Inventive sampling or really, really catchy hooks all of the time.
I think the instrumentals are super catchy. I think just the core sound here is what sets it apart. I just think this choice to be super minimal, really at most you have, I think the whole album, synths and drums, and that's it. I can't recall another real noise on here, you know, besides like some vocal melodies that are kind of looped into the track. The super minimalism here really makes this thing.
So I had the idea that we should give our scores first, because Chaz has just this look on his face.
Chaz is going to go last.
All right. Yeah. So, Brian, what's the score for you?
I would go with like a decent 8 on this thing.
I'm going to go with a decent 7.
Decent 5.
It's a moron.
Moron? Are you serious?
Why do you think that?
Okay. So, going into this album, on my first listen...
You just called him a moron. I just like slowly sunk in, like, man, that was hostile.
All right. So, my biggest issue with this album is a combination of two things. It's similar to my complaints on Nicki Minaj's Queen and Brockhampton's Saturation 1. It's too long. The repetitive doesn't bother me because a lot of these beats are actually pretty cool and very interesting. And yeah, I wouldn't even barely call it trap with these beat works. A lot of them are very catchy. The repetitive never really gets to me. It's kind of like a similar reason why people like Lil Pump, that visceral, like, repeating the lyrics. I just think Lil Pump has much more energy. I really don't think Playboi Carti brings a lot to the table in terms of performance-wise, because, God, his vocals on Flatbed's freestyle annoy the piss out of me.
I actually super agree with you. People really like that track, dude. I don't get it. That's a very low point for me.
Yeah, me too. That was kind of a slog.
It's
I don't
pretty
think,
grating.
like, one of the beats
Is that song like 8 minutes long? How long is that?
No.
It's 3 minutes.
Dude, I actually
Plus,
super
it's
agree
near the
with
back
that.
half of the album, so you have to sit through it to get to the end. It's
Oh man, and
horrible.
it comes at like not a great point to put that song at, honestly, because
Yeah.
like it is a bit of a song.
and
It's an hour.
It's one of the more uninteresting beats.
Oh my god,
so
man.
okay. So I will say this: compared to Nicki Minaj's Queen, the features on this are far better.
They go over really well. Bryson
They
Tiller's
do. They
not
vibe well
someone-
with Playboi style and sounds, the beats. Chief Keef is a god. I love
Speaking
him.
of Nicki Minaj, her feature's pretty good on this.
Her features all right, but
There's some corny bars on here, but they go over well with me. I like the Big Apple line, and she's like says something about FaceTime, and then she's like, "I'm the best thing to come out of the Big Apple since FaceTime." It's like, you know, I'm cringing a little bit, but I'm like, okay, that's kind of a
but
bar.
that's clever wordplay. Lyrically, this is one of the stupidest albums I've ever heard. There is no substance. The one line that's even worth something is, "I bought my mom's house off this mumbling shit." That's a great line. But guess when it comes into the album, on the second song, after that, woo, right off a fucking cliff. We don't get shit. This man says the word bitch 212 times. The most is on Poke It Out, where he says it 40 times.
What's the least, Chaz?
The least is on 2 songs They escape me.
He has them. He knows which ones are the lead.
2 songs, I can't remember, but 2 songs he doesn't say it once. And I was really proud of him.
You didn't look at the lyrics this hard for... Imagine if you looked at the lyrics this hard for, like, On the Moon or something. Like, you'd have been completely...
Shut the hell up. Don't even compare.
Oh my god.
My favorite song is Shoota with Lil Uzi Vert.
Yes,
Oh yeah, that's my favorite song
That's
too.
a great song.
Yeah, good pick. Both the right opinions.
Catchiest song, best beat, I think.
The warped strings
And
and
Lil
piano.
Uzi's delivery on that is pretty solid.
And when before
Uzi really destroys it. That's like my
Yeah.
favorite feature. It's probably my favorite
My
verse
favorite
of
feature
his.
is Chief Keef because I'm a huge Chief
before
Keef
the
fan.
percussion even comes in on Shoota, like the warped piano and strings, it's honestly it's like a
pretty
beautiful,
beautiful.
breathtaking moment. And then when the drop finally hits, that song is
I
genuinely
wish more
kind
of
of
the
amazing.
Album, I wish more of the album was like that. These beats
And there's
are-
not even a chorus on that song either, by
No,
the
it's
way.
just verses.
They just go through the verse. It's like the greatest song, and it comes right in the middle after we get a bunch of other great tracks. Like Shoota comes right before Right Now and Poke It Out and Home, but all of which are great, and everything
The worst
before, which is
song
great.
on this album is Choppa Won't Miss.
I thought we just agreed it was Flatbed Freestyle.
Well, yeah, but that's just because of his vocals.
I do
The worst
agree,
actual song is Choppa Won't Miss.
That sucks.
Because Choppa Won't Miss. Shut up. I hate that motif of like, I'm hard, I got the strap, I'm gonna kill you. No,
You liked when Peggy did it.
I believed him. I don't believe a fucking word this guy says. And Young Thug is trash.
Oh, man. That's
God.
a bad opinion.
Bitch.
I get you, Chaz. I understand the lyrics here, for the most part, just not good.
It wasn't annoying. Like, Nicki Minaj was annoying to sit through. It's just, lyrically, this is such a vast pit of pointlessness. Because there's so much not being... How can a man say so many things in 50 minutes and not say anything?
That's true, but he does it enough that it kind of becomes endearing and it kind of becomes funny. And I think that he's probably aware of just how much he's doing it, and he's pushing it to the point where he's like, this is going to get really repetitive, don't have much to say. Let's take that to the extreme. And let's make the most repetitive vocal lines that we can do and also make very repetitive, dreamy, entrancing beats. And that's where this album succeeds. The production on this thing is very dreamlike, very surreal. And I think that the repetitive lyrics and vocal delivery adds to that production.
If the features and the beats weren't as solid as they are, this would be like a 3. The beats and features save the album for me.
I even think that Playboi Carti's vocals, because of the way that they are manipulated, like back on Saturation 1, I didn't really like the auto-tune because I felt it took away from the emotional impact. Here, I think that this auto-tune is a very deliberate creative choice to make his vocals mesh in with the dreamy production.
I'll agree. Sometimes his vocals really vibe well with his songs. Just the worst of it is Flatbed Freestyle, where it just, he's talking like a 5-year-old.
That one's rough. That
And
was
the thing is, most of these songs are like under 3 minutes. They will come in, they'll establish some kind of organ or keyboard or synth beat that's usually very, very nice and very, very dreamy and enjoyable. They'll throw in some kind of hook or repeated vocal refrain. They'll do that for 2.5 minutes and then they'll be done. And they'll get out before it starts to get too repetitive and too boring. And it'll move on to the next idea. And then usually all of the ideas, the foundations for these tracks, I really like them. I think that they come off very, very well. I think their production is repetitive on purpose to kind of create this hypnotic atmosphere. And I think what's interesting about that is it's a very different appeal than you usually get in hip-hop. I think that it's the kind of appeal that you might get in a techno album, like an ambient techno album, like an Aphex Twin even. Or
Whoa, let's not go that far.
no, I'm serious. It's the same kind of like, I just want to put this on and get lost in the mood.
Then it should have been an instrumental album.
No,
But I think that the vocal hooks are catchy enough to
This man
warrant
said,
them.
fell in love, but that's okay, because I'm in love.
How many times do they say Metropolis on Metropolis?
How many times do they say we are the robots for 6 minutes?
Shut your fucking mouth.
It's
That
the
is a
same
No,
it's
it's absolutely comparable.
point.
But it has substance. It has meaning. This
What?
isn't-
How? Conceptually, sure, I agree with you, but I'm asking you, how does this album have no substance?
Please tell me. Enlighten me. Fell in love.
All right, hold on. I might
Fell
be
in
about to
love.
take an L. No.
Okay, there is one line
But that's
from
okay,
that song.
because I'm in love. What?
Okay, there is one line from that song that I think is not the best. Fell in love with the love.
I mean, wow, Brian.
Sure, it's really.
Wow. Holy God.
Sure, it's really like badly said. Sure, but like I get what he's going for there.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Like if I had to explain it, falling in love with the maybe tie it to infatuation a little bit, like falling in love with the like the idea of love more than actually loving itself.
Oh, I can see that.
But sure, it's not said totally deep, obviously. Like for the record, I do have emotional connection to really only one song on here. Long Time.
Long Time is
I
besides.
feel
Sugar
that
is the best
song so hard, man. That song makes me
a
want
great
to.
opener.
That song makes me want to like bust my ass and work until I
It's
die.
the one time that Playboi Carti actually feels genuine.
It's introspective.
God,
It's
and
good.
And it's the same issue I had Saturated 1. I'm going to state for the record right now that I don't mind rappers doing the typical rap stuff. Like, I got money.
Bragging,
I
yeah.
took your girl. That, whatever. You're going to have that. The reason it disappointed me on Saturation 1 was because I wasn't expecting that from them guys because of how introspective and cool.
We had context, but for
Here, I was expecting it. But it's so jarring when you open with such an introspective and pretty awesome song, Long Time, and then the rest of the album is just a vapid...
What do you think about Lean for Real?
that song rules, man.
That's a great song.
Yes. Oh my God.
It's so
Thank
catchy.
you.
The
Jake,
production is so dreamy. It's very like the feature with Skepta. His London accent gives the
grime
verse a
feature
different kind of feel.
I love how that break. I'm never expecting it. I know it's there, and every time he comes in with like his like very distinct rap style over this song, but it makes the whole song
It's
like even better.
woozy.
The features
And it kind
are
of-
solid.
It's like the musical equivalent of going to the dentist office and like being numbed before they have to fill a cavity or something and like, whoa.
For me, it's
You know
not
what
so
I
much
mean?
that.
Like, that's
it's
the musical
for me,
equivalent
it's,
of that.
For me, it's just like hypno. Whereas I'm not maybe hypnotized, I would say, by like a craft work. I'm more interested and engaged. Like this kind of takes me out of observing. It really is just
There's
like
no
really
visceral
feeling it.
feeling. It's so... Playboi Carti's delivery is just so boring sometimes, where he doesn't even feel like he wants to be there. I'll say it again, like that's why I like Lil Pump better, because he's just as repetitive. He's so energetic.
They're really different though. Like honestly,
Not-
at this
not
stage,
really.
absolutely. A Lil Pump song, would you mistake any Lil Pump song for a Playboi
what I'm
Carti
saying
song?
is like they're both going to repeat the choruses over and over, but one is so much more energetic and charismatic than the other. Can you guess which one
I think
it
Carti is way more charismatic than Pump.
Hell no.
Pump is just super hedonistic.
I gotta mention one of my tracks that I really, really enjoy, and that's Poke It Out.
Yes.
I love the little synth melody. You know who it reminds me of? It reminds me of Gorillaz. That little synth melody that comes in, it sounds like something that could be on Plastic Beach. I do think that this is a bit overlong. It runs out of steam by the end. Sometimes it's too minimal for its own good, and I do wish that there was a bit more lyrical substance. There's a certain point where the braggadocious lyrics kind of wear off on me. There's points where they're done so over the top that it becomes funny and endearing and entertaining. But then there are other moments where I'm like, all right, here we go again.
The last three tracks here, like I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. Like, okay, I don't really like Top is like I get why it's the closer. And I don't think anything else really towards the latter half could close it. I just think, like, honestly, it starts to sound samey at that point in the worst way. Like, I think we get the same synth melody on one of these songs as from Poke It Out. Like, I think that melody comes back, or even Long Time or Lean for Real. Like, it gets repetitive in the worst way towards the end. It's a slog. I'm not gonna lie. 57 minutes probably didn't need to be that long. You probably cut 4 tracks from here. Like Foreign is a weaker moment for me. Pull Up is okay. It's kind of funny. Like I like the refrain on that one's like super cartoonish. Mileage is great.
Mileage is, it's very good.
I love the refrain on that one.
Mileage. I wish it wasn't so crude, but I do like the message that it says.
Don't like the Gunna feature. Sorry.
I'm not too much of a fan.
See,
I do love the feature.
You
Did
know
you like Red Cold
Yeah,
Hearted
that
on
was like
Middle
my
of the
second
Summer?
favorite
Yeah,
feature.
wow.
Honestly,
I'm really glad you like that because I thought you
with
would.
this album is how forgettable it is.
In part, sure, but like in general,
Like
no.
that back half of the album, I couldn't tell you like half
Oh, the
the
back
tracks.
half a little bit. I know.
The only song I remember is Mileage.
Flatbed Freestyle stands out for worse, but like it stands out.
But, like,
Middle of the
Chopper
Summer,
won't-
I like Chopper Won't Miss. You recalled the hook yourself.
Well, that's because just how
And Top has a cool refrain
Rip
on
Frito,
the way out.
Top, No Time, like
Rip Frito
Pull Up,
is a-
Foreign. I don't remember anything from those tracks.
I legit like
And I
Rip
listened to
Frito.
this 4 times.
So this album is riding on the strength of the production, the instrumental palette, and the beats. But for me, all of that is so good that it just elevates it to a pretty high level, whereas it would be much lower. So yeah, this is like a decent 7 for me, especially with like a track like Shoota or Lean for Real, Long Time, R.I.P., Poke It Out, Mileage. There's a lot of really solid tracks here, and the way that they run into each other and just flow, it's like one long song with different parts and different dreamy, just the instrumentals here really grabbed me and put me into the middle of this album and made it very enjoyable to listen to for me.
For me, it's like there are days where I like this album more than Denzel Curry's Taboo. And the reason being is, even though there's no consciousness on here really, it's mostly self-referential, like braggadocious, I think it's more consistent than that album. I think it has a more consistent sound, and while it's not, I actually think Taboo is catchier in the parts where it is catchy and the songs are written better. But here, like, there's no moments that are, like, the lows here, besides Flatbed Freestyle, aren't really super low. They're just sort of passable. It's like, okay, sure. And there's oftentimes they're short enough.
Yeah, and they get out of the way in like 2.5 minutes at most.
I don't know, man. I just really love this thing. Like, I was pretty wowed by it. Still am. It hasn't worn off. It's only grown on me more. I'm feeling like a decent 8.
You may think that I shouldn't like have the right to complain because I'm a huge trap fan. I like Triple X. I like Lil Yachty. I like Lil Uzi, 21 Savage. I like all those guys. What I don't do, though, is listen to their full albums. Singles all the way. Never, ever listen, because then I'll hate them. This proves my point. If I was just listening to a couple songs by Playboi Carti, I'd like him. But just having to listen to a full trap album, hell no. Denzel Curry's Taboo is so much better, Brian. You're wrong. Decent 5.
And with that, whatever it was, we will highlight the albums that we are choosing for next week's episode, which is a themed episode.
It's spooky, scary albums.
And I am going to choose an album that is kind of an easy pick when it comes to this topic, kind of an internet music nerd staple, but one that I listened to recently and thought would make for pretty interesting discussion. It's Naked City by John Zorn.
I'm going to do a more recent Among Music Nerds classic, I think. I see this popping up in tons of people's lists lately. It's an album I'm familiar with and it's grown on me with time. Me and Jacob have heard it, but I'm interested to see what Chaz thinks about it and how it kind of, what his initial thoughts are, especially in the context of like, okay, this is supposed to be scary. Kind of curious to see where he goes from there. It's Daughter's comeback album, You Won't Get What You Want.
I'm going to change it up a bit. You know, it's time for some more ambient music. I'm going to do a dark ambient drone album by the artist Death Cube K. His 1994 release, Dreamatorium.
This has been Unwarranted Music Opinions. We somehow got through this episode without someone being flung over the table and crashing into a heap, though that may still occur. I'm Jacob Lindberg, and I was here with Brian Courtney.
Playboi Carti's Die-Lit is as good and sometimes better than Denzel Curry's Taboo.
And Chaz Jenkins.
Brian Courtney has a smooth brain.
And we will return next time.